Good day everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, welcome. If not, welcome back. Today's video we're going to be talking about everything dental anatomy for the dental hygienist and also for the dental assistants. Either way, this is just a brief overview. Of course, this is nothing like what the book will tell you, but just a short, quick introductory to dental anatomy. For those of you who are in the program currently or are going into this is definitely the video for you. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with tooth number 1. Yes, this is all 32 teeth. Let's get right into this video. Now, video number 1. These cards here, I got these cards from out of my dental anatomy book for the dental hygienist. I don't remember exactly which name of the book, but I know for sure it is definitely Mosby's, that's for sure. And then also came from McGraw-Hill, that's also the book company. So let's get right into this video once again. This video here, let's go ahead and get started. This card here, this is the permanent maxillary right third molar. I went ahead and I laminated these cards myself because it comes in the book and you can go ahead and rip them out, and these are really good flashcards, if you will, to kind of brush up your skills on anatomy for what you're going to need for classes. Let's continue. The universal code is number 1. The international code is 18. Because international means that in the first quadrant is tooth number 8. Palmar notation, it is tooth number 8. Number of roots, 1 to 4. Pulp horns, 1 to 4. Number of cusps, 3 to 5. Number of developmental lobes, 4. Location of proximal contact areas, mesial, middle third, distal, which means towards the back of the tooth is nothing behind it because it is the first tooth. Height of contour, facial, cervical third, 0.5 millimeters, lingual, middle third, 0.5 milliliters. Remember, lingual is anything that's towards the tongue. Facial is like towards the cheek. Facial, buccal towards the cheek. Facial, I would say that that's more for the teeth in the front from canine to canine, which are like the fang teeth. Buccal, I would say those are more the premolars and the molars, but however you fancy. But in this case here, because this is a tooth, I would say this one is more buccal than it is facial. But you beg to differ. Anyway, to continue. To define characteristics, these teeth vary more in form than any others. They usually do not have a distal lingual cusp. The occlusal outline is heart-shaped with 3 cusps. The roots, usually 3, have a tendency to be very close together or fuse with an extreme distal inclination. This is what the teeth look like clinically. This is the occlusal view. And technically, for those of you who don't know, this here is the clinical crown. No. This is the clinical crown. Because clinically, when you open the patient's mouth, this is what you can see. This is the anatomical crown. Just so that you guys know. This is for future cards that will go down the line. Clinical, anatomical, because it's the entire tooth. Alright, next. Don't want this too long. Next, permanent maxillary, right second molar. Universal code 2. International code 17, which is quadrant 1, tooth 7. Palmar notation 7. Number of roots, 3. Number of pulp horns, 4. Number of cusps, 4. Number of developmental lobes, 4. Location of proximal contact areas: mesial, middle third, distal, middle third. Remember, distal is everything always towards the back. Height of contour: facial, cervical third, 0.5 millimeters, lingual, middle third, 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics: these teeth are similar to maxillary first molars, except that the fifth cusp is usually absent and the distal lingual cusp is less well developed. The oblique ridge is less prominent. The crown is shorter occlusal-cervically and narrow mesial-distally. It is just as wide buccolingually. The occlusal outline of the crown is rhomboid to heart-shaped. The three roots are less separated. Here's a picture. Occlusal, clinical view, anatomical view, and you can see how the roots are separated there in this view here. Next, permanent maxillary right first molar. No, guys, this set here does not include the primary teeth, which are only 20 teeth. Let's continue. Universal code 3, international code 16, which is quadrant 1, tooth 6. Palmar notation 6. Number of roots 3. Number of pulporns 4. Number of cusps 4. 5, including the cusp of Carabelli. For patients who have that fifth one will be the cusp of Carabelli. Number of developmental lobes 5. Location of proximal contact areas: mesial middle third, distal middle third. Height of contour: facial, cervical third, 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third, 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristic: the cusp of Carabelli may be present. The occlusal outline is square or rhomboidal rather than triangular. The distal lingual cusp is well developed. There is a prominent oblique ridge and a distal facial and lingual grooves. The crown is nearly as wide mesial-distally and buccolingually. The three roots are widely separated. Here you go. Occlusal. Once again, clinical crown. Anatomical. See how the roots separate? These cards are so good. And then for cusp of Carabelli, here. Or which view has a better angle? Maybe here, if you guys can see that. All right. Next is the permanent maxillary right second premolar. Universal code 4, international code 15. Palmar notation 5. Number of roots 1. Number of pulporns 2. Number of cusps 2. Number of developmental lobes 4. Location of proximal contact areas: mesial and distal, just cervical to the junction of occlusal and middle thirds. Height of contour: facial, cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics: these premolars usually have a single root. About 40% have 2 root canals. The buccal and lingual cusps are nearly equal in length. The buccal cusp is shorter than that of the first premolar. The entire crown, especially the occlusal outline, is less angular and more rounded. The occlusal surface has more supplemental grooves. The occlusal developmental grooves are shorter, shallower, and more irregular. Let's take a look. Here you go. Occlusal. All angles. Look at the cusps in the occlusal photo. A more U-shaped cusp. Next. Permanent maxillary right first premolar, Universal Code 5, International Code 14, Palmar notation for number of roots 2, pulp horns 2, cusps 2, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas, mesial and distal, just cervical to the junction of occlusal and middle thirds. Head of contour, facial, cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual, middle third 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics, these premolars have bifurcated roots. Bifurcated means that it divides in two. By two. Trifurcated means it's split into three. So to continue, a longitudinal groove is present on the root. The mesial surface shows a developmental fossa. The mesial marginal groove crosses the mesial marginal ridge and extends into the mesial surface. The facial cusp is wider and longer than the lingual cusp. The mesial ridge of the facial cusp may have a slight concavity. Let's see what this looks like. Remember, distal is always a back. Occlusion mean like right on, like where the patient bites. That's occlusion. That's this one here. That's where the patient bites. Remember, buccal towards the cheek, lingual towards the side of where the tongue sits. And remember, bifurcated is 2. Trifurcated, that was 3. Let's continue. Permanent maxillary right canine. The fang teeth. Universal Code 6. International Code 13. Palmar notation 3. Number of roots 1. Number of pulp horns 1. Number of cusps 1. Number of developmental lobes 4. Location of proximal contact areas. Mesial, junction of the incisal and middle thirds. Distal, middle third. Head of contour. Facial, cervical third 0.5 millimeters. Lingual, cervical third 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics. The maxillary canines are the longest teeth in the mouth. Yes, they are. They have a single cusp with mesial and distal ridges forming on the incisal edge. Incisal is the part where you bite, like the top pointed top of the tooth. That's incisal. A prominent facial ridge is off-center towards the mesial. Cingulum is prominent. The prominent mesofacial lobe forms this facial ridge of the cusp. The central facial lobe forms the lingual edge of the cusp, which is, remember what lingual is? Lingual is towards the tongue. The lingual ridge divides the mesial and distal fossa. The distal facial ridge is longer and more rounded than the mesiofacial. Remember, the distal facial ridge is longer and more rounded than the mesiofacial. Here's what it looks like. Look at these super long roots. Here's the incisal edge here. Remember, now that we're getting towards the front, canine to canine is no longer occlusal. Now it's called incisal, because this is the edge that bites and tears off the food. Remember, occlusal more crush and grinds the food. Next, we have the permanent maxillary right lateral incisor, universal code 7, international code 2, number of roots 2, pulp horns 1. Number of roots is 1. Number of pulp, 1 to 3. Yeah, I can have 1. Sometimes they have 2, but sometimes they can have 3. Why? Because there's something called mamelons, which you'll also learn in class, which are like the rounded prominent ridges that are on the incisal edges of the teeth. Let's move forward. Number of developmental lobes 4. Location of proximal contact areas, mesial junction of incisal and middle thirds, distal middle third, height of contour, facial cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual cervical third 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics: the lingual anatomical features are similar to those of the central incisors, but are more highly developed and have more prominent marginal ridges and a deeper lingual fossa. Lateral incisors are more likely to have a lingual pit. The cingulum may be smaller, almost absent. The labial surface resembles that of a central incisor, except that the labial surface is more convex. The crown root ratio is less than in a central incisor because the crown is usually smaller. For areas, the root is almost as long. In all other ways, the lateral incisors appear as smaller, more rounded versions of the central incisors. Let's take a look. Look at the roots, look at the fossae. Now look at the incisal edge. Okay. This video will be lengthy, but it's worth it. Okay, next, permanent maxillary right central incisor. Universal code 8, international code 11, palmar notation 1, number of roots 1, pulp horns 3, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas, incisal third, distal junction of the incisal and middle thirds, height of contour, cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual cervical third 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics: these incisors are the largest and most prominent incisors. The distal incisal is more rounded than that of the meso-incisal angle. The lingual surface has a more prominent cingulum, broad lingual fossa, and distinct marginal ridges. The pulp cavity is one large single chamber and root canal. Let's take a look. Yeah, this is the facial view here, for sure. Remember, these are the teeth in the front. Incisal edge. Next tooth. Permanent maxillary left central incisor. Universal code 9. International code now, quadrant 2, tooth 1. Palmar notation, number 1. Number of roots, 1. Pulp horns, 3. Number of developmental lobes, 4. Location of proximal contact areas, mesial incisal third, distal junction of incisal and middle third. Facial, height of contour, facial, cervical third, 0.5 millimeters. Lingual, cervical third, 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics, these incisors are the largest and most prominent incisors. The distal incisal is more rounded than the mesial incisal angle. The lingual surface has a more prominent cingulum, a broad lingual fossa, and a distinct marginal ridges. The pulp cavity is one large single root chamber and root canal. Let's see what it looks like. Facial side. This is the lingual side. Incisal edge. And then the mesial and the distal views are towards the bottom. Let's move on. Oh, now I see why dental anatomy classes were so long and boring. Oh my goodness. Here we go. Next, permanent maxillary left lateral incisor. Universal code 10. Palmar code 22, which means quadrant 2, tooth 2. Palmar notation is 2. Number of roots 1. Number of pulp horns 1 to 3. Because I could have either 1, 2, or 3 pulp horns. Number of developmental lobes 4. Location of proximal areas. Mesial junction of incisal and middle thirds. Distal middle third. Height of contour facial, cervical third 0.5 millimeters. Lingual cervical third 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics, this lingual and anatomical features are similar to those of the central incisors but are more highly developed and have more prominent marginal ridges and deeper lingual fossae. The lateral incisors are more likely to have a lingual pit. The cingulum may be smaller, the cingulum may be smaller, almost absent. The labial surface resembles that of a central incisor, except that the labial surface is more convex, which means pointing outward. Concave going inward, convex coming outward. The crown root ratio is less than a central incisor because the crown is usually smaller, whereas the root is almost as long. In all other ways, the lateral incisors appear as smaller, more rounded versions of the central incisors. Let's see what this looks like. Facial side, lingual side. Remember, lingual is towards the tongue. Incisal edge, where you tear or chew off the food, tear off the food. And here are the distal and the mesial sides there. Next, don't want this video too long, so let's move along this quickly. Don't want these too long. Permanent maxillary left canine, which is the other fang tooth. Universal code 11. Palmar, your universal code 11. International code 23. Palmar notation is 3. Remember the boxes. All the boxes will tell you if it's upper, if it's lower. You'll see. So pay close attention to wherever I say Palmar notation. You'll see how the angles of the boxes change when we go from quadrant to quadrant. And yes, okay, so here we go. Number of roots 1, number of pulp horns 1, number of cusps 1, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas, mesial junction of incisal and middle thirds, distal middle third, height of contour, facial cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual cervical third 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics, how to identify the tooth. The maxillary canines are the longest teeth in the mouth. They have a single cusp with mesial and distal ridges forming an incisal edge. The proximal facial ridge is off-center towards the mesial, Cingulum is prominent. The prominent facial lobe forms this facial ridge of the cusp. The central facial lobe forms the lingual ridge of the cusp. The lingual ridge divides the mesial and distal fossae. The distal facial ridge is longer and more rounded than the mesofacial. Let's see what it looks like. Facial edge, incisal edge, lingual edge. Remember, lingual is towards the tongue, and the distal and mesial views are here. Let's move on. Wow, we still have a whole bottom to go, guys. Okay, remember, we're still on maxillary. Permanent maxillary left first premolar, Universal Code 12, International Code 24, Palmar notation 4, number of roots 2, number of pulpons 2, number of cusps 2, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas, mesial and distal, just cervical to the junction of occlusal and middle thirds, height of contour, facial, cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics: these premolars have bifurcated roots, which mean that how many does it have? 2. Bi means 2. Tri means 3. A longitudinal groove is present on the root. The mesial surface shows a developmental fossa. The mesial marginal groove crosses the mesial marginal ridge and extends onto the mesial surface. The facial cusp is wider and longer than the lingual cusp. The mesial ridge of the facial cusp may have a slight concavity. Let's see what it looks like. Incisal edge, facial, lingual, and the distal and the lingual. Yeah, the distal and the lingual. Not lingual, distal and the mesial. Lingual, mesial. Means towards mesial means towards the front. Distal towards the back. Mesial means towards the front of the mouth, or the mouth of the tooth, whichever. Next, permanent maxillary right, second left premolar, Universal Code 13, Palmar notation 25. No, Palmar notation 5. International Code 25. Yeah, but Palmar notation is 5. Number of roots 1. Number of pulpons 2. Cusps 2. Number of developmental lobes 4. Location of proximal and contact areas. Mesial and distal, just cervical to the junction of occlusal and middle thirds. Height of contour, facial, cervical third 0.5 millimeters. Lingual middle third 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics: these premolars usually have a single root. About 40% have 2 root canals. The buccal and lingual cusps are nearly equal in length. The buccal cusp is shorter than that of the first premolar. The entire crown, especially the occlusal outline, is less angular and more rounded. The occlusal surface has more supplemental grooves. The occlusal developmental grooves are shorter, shallower, and more irregular. Let's see what it looks like. Facial, lingual, occlusal, and the distal and mesial surfaces. Permanent maxillary left first molar, Universal Code 14, International Code 26, Palmar notation 6, number of roots 3, pulpons 4, number of cusps 4. The pulpons are 4, number of cusps 4, but 5 because it also, like I said, includes the cusp of carabelli. Number of developmental lobes 5, location of proximal and contact areas, mesial middle third, distal middle third, height of contour, facial, cervical third 0.5 millimeters. I'm sorry about that, guys. Lingual, middle third, 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics, a cusp of gravity may be present. The occlusal outline is square or rhomboidal rather than triangular. The distal lingual cusp is well developed. There is a prominent oblique ridge and distal facial and lingual grooves. The crown is nearly as wide mesiodistally as buccolingually. The three roots are widely separated. Yeah, see how widely separated they are? You can clearly see the prominent three roots there. So this is trifurcated. Occlusal edge, and then the mesial and the distal views are here. Next tooth. Permanent maxillary left second molar, Universal Code 15, International Code 27, Palmer Notation 7, number of roots 3, number of pulpons 4, number of cusps 4, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas in regional middle third, distal middle third, height of contour, facial, cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics, these teeth are similar to maxillary first molars, except that the fifth cusp is usually absent and the distal lingual cusp is less well developed. The oblique ridge is less prominent. The crown is shorter, occlusal-cervically, and narrow mesodistally. It is just as wide buccolingually. The occlusal outline of the crown is rhomboidal to heart-shaped. The three roots are less separated. Here's what it looks like. Occlusal edge. Okay. Next tooth. Permanent maxillary left third molar. Universal Code 16, which is the last tooth in the maxillary arch. 16, International Code 28, Palmer Notation 8, number of roots 1 to 4, number of pulpons 1 to 4, number of cusps 3 to 5, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas, mesial middle third, distal none because there's nothing after that tooth. Height of contour, facial, cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics, these teeth vary more in form than any others. They usually do not have a distal lingual cusp. The occlusal outline is heart-shaped with 3 cusps. The roots, usually 3, have a tendency to be very close together or to fuse with an extreme distal inclination. Let's see what that looks like. They're more closely together as it approaches the distal part of the mouth, like more towards the back of the mouth. Here's the occlusal surface there. There you go. Now we're finally on the mandibular, which is the bottom jaw. Let's go. Permanent mandibular left third molar, Universal Code 17, International Code 38, which is now quadrant 3 tooth 8, Palmer Notation 8, number of roots 2 fused into 1, number of pulp horns 4 to 5, number of cusps 4 or 5, number of developmental lobes 4 or 5, location of proximal contact areas, mesial middle third, distal middle third, height of contour, facial cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 1 millimeter. How to identify the characteristic? These are the most variable mandibular teeth in form. They usually resemble the mandibular second molars with four cusps and a shallower, smaller central fossa with more secondary and tertiary grooves. A five cusp form is not unusual. The two roots, mesial and distal, often fuse and incline towards the distal side. Let's see what it looks like. Occlusal, mesial and distal angles. Next tooth, we have the permanent mandibular second, left second molar, universal code 18, international code 37, permanent notation 7. Look how the brackets change. Number of roots 2, number of pulp horns 4, number of cusps 4, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas, mesial middle third, distal middle third, height of contour, cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 1 millimeter. Identifying characteristics: these molars have four cusps or of nearly equal size. The crown is smaller in all dimensions and has less lingual convergence. There is only one buccal groove and one lingual groove, which join together on the occlusal surface as they bisect the central developmental groove. The groove pattern is therefore a cross, or it makes like a plus shape or like a cross. The two roots are closer together and incline slightly distally. There is one root canal in the distal root. The mesial root can have one or two root canals. Let's see what this looks like. Yeah, literally looks like a cross. See that on the occlusal plane? All right, next tooth. Now we have the permanent mandibular left first molar, universal code 19, international code 36, prominent notation 6, number of roots 2, number of pulp horns 5, number of cusps 5, number of developmental lobes 5, location of proximal contact areas, mesial middle third, distal middle third, height of contour, facial, cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 1 millimeter. Identifying characteristics: these five cusps make these the largest mandibular teeth. They are wider mesodistally than buccolingually. The crown converges lingually and slightly distally. The three buccal cusps are separated by two buccal grooves. The two lingual cusps are separated by one lingual groove. These grooves converge to form a wide pattern. These are two roots, a mesial and distal, and three root canals. The mesial root has two root canals. Occlusal, mesodistal. Okay, next tooth. Oh my goodness, this is like scratching your nails on a chalkboard. Okay, let's move forward. All right, next, permanent mandibular left second premolar. We're almost done, guys. We're almost done. International code 20, and universal code 20, international code 35, prominent notation 5, number of roots 1, pulp horns 2 or 3, number of cusps 2 or 3, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas, mesial and distal or cervical to junction and occlusal middle thirds, height of contour, facial cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 1 millimeter. Identifying characteristics: these premolars have 2 or 3 cusps. The buccal cusp is very large. If 2 lingual cusps are present, the mesial lingual is larger. Although the lingual cusps are longer, Then on the first premolar, they are a functional and do not occlude with the maxillary teeth. A second premolar has more secondary anatomical features and more variation than any other tooth except a third molar. The two cusps form a U or H groove pattern. A mesolingual groove is rare and poorly developed if present. The three cusp form has a lingual developmental groove between two lingual cusps. The single root is longer and larger than that of the first premolar. Let's see what it looks like. Lingual, facial, occlusal, and the meso and distal views are here. I wish I had clearer pictures. Next, permanent mandibular left first premolar, Universal Code 21, International Code 34, palmar notation 4, number of roots 1, pulp horns 1 or 2, cusp 2, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas, medial and distal, just cervical to the junction of occlusion and middle thirds, head of contour, facial, cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 1 millimeter. Identifying characteristics: these premolars have two cusps, one large buccal or one small lingual. The buccal cusps are centered directly over the root, and the lingual cusps are centered lingual to the root and are a functional and non-occluding. The occlusal surface slopes sharply lingual to a cervical direction. The mesobuccal cusp ridge is shorter than the distal buccal cusp ridge. It has a more distal lingual developmental groove and one root. Let's see what it looks like. This is lingual towards the tongue, facial towards the cheek, occlusal, but this is more incisal. No, let's see what does it say. Premolar, yeah, then that's considered occluded. That's not an incisor anymore. Next tooth. Permanent mandibular left canine, Universal Code 22, and International Code 33. Palmar notation 3, number of roots 1 or 2, number of pulp horns 1, number of cusps 1, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas, mesial incisal third, distal just cervical to the junction of incisal and middle thirds, head of contour, facial cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters, lingual cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics of these crowns is similar to the crown of the maxillary canines, but more narrower and smoother. It has less prominent lingual features from a proximal view. The cusp tip is inclined to the lingual. From an incisal view, the distal end of the incisal edge is rotated to the lingual. They have the longest roots in the mandibular arch, with longitudinal grooves on the root. Let's see what it looks like. Lingual, facial, mesial distal contacts. Now this one has to be considered the incisal. Let's move forward. Permanent mandibular left lateral incisor, Universal Code 23, International Code 32, palmar notation 2, number of roots 1, number of pulp horns 3, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal distal contact areas, mesial incisal third, distal incisal third, height of contour, facial cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters, Lingual cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics. The crown is similar to that of the mandibular central incisors. The distal lobe is more highly developed than the mesial. The distal incisor ridge angles towards the lingual as if rotating on the root axis. The crown and root are slightly larger than those of the central incisors. Let's see what these look like. Lingual, facial, incisal, and the mesial and distal views are here. Okay, guys, we're rolling and rolling and rolling along. We're almost there. Now we're on a permanent mandibular left central incisor. Universal code 24, international code 31. Prominent, which means quadrant 3, tooth 1. Palm notation 1. Number of roots 1. Pulp horns 3. Number of developmental lobes 4. Location of proximal contact areas. Mesial incisal third, distal incisal third, head of contour. Cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters. Lingual cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters. Now let's get into the identifying characteristics. The distal incisal and mesial incisal angles are nearly identical. The lingual surface is shallow with no prominent features. The crown is wider facial-lingually than mesodistally. The root is oval-shaped in a cross-section. The incisal edge shows wear on the facial incisal edge. From a proximal view, the incisal edge appears to be tilted towards the lingual side. Let's see what this looks like. Okay. Next, we're almost done, guys. We're almost done. Permanent mandibular right central incisor. Universal code 25. International code 41. Palmar notation 1. Number of roots 1. Number of pulp horns 3. Number of developmental lobes 4. Location of proximal contact areas. Mesial incisal third. Distal incisal third. Height of contour. Facial cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters. And lingual cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics: the distal incisal and mesial incisal edges are nearly identical. The lingual surface is shallow with no prominent features. The crown is wider facial-lingually than mesodistally. The root is oval-shaped in cross-section. The incisal edge shows wear on the facial incisal edge. From a proximal view, the incisal edge appears to be tilted towards the lingual side. Let's see what it looks like. Facial, lingual, incisal, and the distal and mesial edges are here. Let's move forward. Permanent mandibular right lateral incisor. Okay, so universal code 26, international code 42, palmar notation 2. Watch the brackets on the palmar notation again. Number of roots 1, number of pulp horns 3, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas, mesial incisal third, distal incisal third, height of contour, cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters, lingual cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics: this crown is similar to that of the mandibular central incisors. The distal lobe is more highly developed than the mesial. The distal incisal ridge angles towards the lingual as if rotating on the root axis. The crown and the root are slightly larger than those of the central incisors. Let's see what this looks like. Lingual, incisal, mesial and distal edges are here. Let's move forward. Next, we have the permanent mandibular right canine, universal code 27. Palm notation 43. Palm notation is 3. International code is 43. Number of roots 1 or 2. Pulp horns 1. Cusp 1. Number of developmental lobes is 4. Location of proximal contact areas. Mesial, incisal third, distal, just cervical to the junction of incisal and middle thirds. Height of contour, facial cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters. Lingual cervical third less than 0.5 millimeters. Identifying characteristics. The crown is similar to the crown of the maxillary canines but narrower and smoother. It has less prominent lingual features. From a proximal view, the cusp tip is inclined to the lingual. From the incisal view, the distal end of the incisal edge is rotated to the lingual. They have the longest roots in the mandibular arch with longitudinal grooves on the root. Let's take a look at what it looks like. Next tooth. We have the permanent mandibular right first premolar, universal code 28, international code 44, palmar notation 4, number of roots 1, pulp horns 1 or 2, number of cusps 2, number of developmental lobes 4, location of proximal contact areas, mesial and distal, just cervical to the junction of the occlusal and middle thirds, height of contour, cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 1 millimeter. Identifying characteristics. These premolars have 2 cusps, one larger buccal and one small lingual. The buccal cusps are centered directly on the root. The lingual cusps are centered lingual to the root and are afunctional and non-occluding. The occlusal surface slopes sharply lingual and a cervical direction. The mesial buccal cusp ridge is shorter than the distal buccal distal buccal cusp ridge. It has a mesolingual developmental groove and 1 root. Let's see what it looks like. Let's move forward. This is the permanent mandibular right second premolar, universal code 29, international code 45, palmar notation 5, number of roots 1, number of pulp horns 2 or 3, number of cusps 2 or 3, number of developmental lobes 4, location and proximal contact areas, mesial and distal, just cervical to the junction of occlusal and middle thirds, height of contour, facial cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 1 millimeter. Identifying characteristics. Here we go. It's a lot. Let's go. These premolars have two or 3 cusps. The buccal cusp is very large. If 2 lingual cusps are present, the mesolingual is the larger. Although the lingual cusps are larger than on a first premolar, they are afunctional and do not occlude with the maxillary teeth. A second premolar has more secondary anatomical features and more variation than any other tooth except a third molar. The 2 cusp form has a U-shape or H-groove pattern. The mesolingual groove is rare and is poorly developed if present. The 3 cusp form has a lingual developmental groove between 2 lingual cusps. The single root is longer and larger than that of a first premolar. Now let's see what it looks like. Next we have the permanent mandibular right first molar, universal code 30, international code 46, palmar notation 6, number of roots 2, number of pulp horns 5, number of cusps 5, number of developmental lobes 5, location of proximal contact areas, mesial middle third, distal middle third, height of contour Facial cervical third 0.5 millimeters. Lingual middle third lingual middle third 1 millimeter. Identifying characteristics of 5 cusps make these the largest mandibular teeth. They are wider mesodistally than buccolingually. The crown converges lingually and slightly distally. The 3 buccal cusps are separated by 2 buccal grooves. The 2 lingual cusps are separated by 1 lingual groove. These 3 grooves converge to form a Y pattern. These are 3 roots, a mesal and distal, and the 3 root canals. The mesal root and has 2 root canals. Let's see what it looks like. Occlusal edge. Let's move forward. Okay, guys, almost done. Bear with me. Thank you for following me this long, but we're almost done. I promise you, we're almost done. Permanent mandibular right second premolar. Right now we're on 231. Remember, we have 32 teeth. Right now we're on 231. So universal code 31. International code 47. Palmar notation 7. Number of roots 2. Number of pulp points 4. Number of cusps 4. Number of developmental lobes 4. Location of proximal contact areas: mesial middle third, distal middle third, height of contour, facial cervical third 0.5 millimeters, lingual middle third 1 millimeter. Identifying characteristics: these molars have 4 cusps of nearly equal size. The crown is smaller in all dimensions and has less lingual convergence. There is only 1 buccal groove and 1 lingual groove, which run together on the occlusal surface as they bisect the central developmental groove. The groove pattern is therefore a cross or like a plus pattern. The 2 roots are closer together and inclined slightly distally. There is 1 root canal in the distal root. The mesal root have 1 or 2 root canals. Let's see what this looks like. Look at the roots. Look at the clinical crown. The incisal edge. Mesial and distal surfaces here. Last but not least, the final tooth. Thank God. Last tooth. Okay, so this is the permanent mandibular right third molar. Universal code 32. Like I promised you guys, 32. International code 48. Palmar notation 8. Number of roots: 2 fused into 1. Pulp horns 4 or 5. Number of cusps 4 or 5. Number of developmental lobes 4 or 5. Location of proximal and contact areas: mesial middle third, distal middle third. Height of contour: facial cervical third 0.5 millimeters. Lingual middle third 1 millimeter. Identifying characteristics: these are the most variable mandibular teeth in form. They usually resemble the mandibular second molars with 4 cusps and a shallower, smaller central fossa with more secondary and tertiary grooves. A 5 cusp form is not unusual. The 2 roots, mesial and distal, and often fused and inclined toward the distal side. And let's take a last look at the tooth. Don't mind my lamination. And here you guys go. Look at the roots, the occlusal edge, and the mesial and the distal surface. Thank you guys so much for watching all the way towards the end. If you guys would like to go ahead and continue to review, go ahead and review. Play this back, rewind it, slow this video down, pause it, and look at all these teeth that are listed here. Look at the grooves, look at the fossa, the incisal edges, the lingual edges. Just look and review, and I guarantee you, if you are a new student, if you are just coming in, this is key, and this is clutch to helping you pass and just grasp the fundamentals of passing dental anatomy. If you ask me, And if you ask hundreds of other students that have been in either dental assisting or dental hygiene, they will tell you that this is one of the toughest classes because there's so much information that you need to know. More videos are coming up. Bear with me. Thank you again for watching all the way to the end. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye. Take care. Good luck. And you will pass. Thank you. Kisses. Bye-bye.